I first knew Ollie as an undergraduate student who would come to me for advice because I was their mentor. And then Ollie enrolled in 2 of my classes. Ollie is a very good student, but many of our students are very good. But there's an occasional student, and Ollie is one of them, who has a real intellectual curiosity. I think this is somebody who has a broad spectrum of interests, and that will really serve well in a future in journalism where you have to just be curious about everything.
I started school here in 2016 as an undergrad, and I graduated in 2020 with my Bachelor's of Arts in Multi-Platform Journalism and a minor in Jewish Studies from the Theology Department. In that time, I worked at the Duke for that 4 years. For my last year at the Duke, I was editor-in-chief, and before that, I was a staff writer, I was the features editor, and I was the opinions editor, and I had a weekly column for a couple of years. Pre-pandemic, it was much different, and I think for me, the thing I love most about journalism is that human connection that you can make with your sources. Pre-pandemic, I met a lot of people in coffee shops or restaurants, libraries, public spaces like that had kind of a good atmosphere that was conducive to just chatting for a while. And I always try to make my sources laugh, so I can kind of establish, there's a level of comfort there. And I think having that connection makes a better story because your source trusts you, so they tell you things, There's a sharing of experience as well as a sharing of words. And I think that that's probably the most important thing in journalism. When the pandemic initially hit in the spring and it became clear that we were going to transition everything to online only, it was kind of a jarring moment because everything I'd learned and everything I'd perfected in the last 4 years working at the Duke as a journalist was suddenly, I had to do things differently now. And that's, meeting the source in person is the biggest thing you want to do in journalism because it gives you that sense of place and personhood rather than just that sense of words that they're saying. And you couldn't do that suddenly. So it became quite apparent that I was going to have to change the way I did things as a journalist. Most of my interviews I've had to do over the phone because of course people aren't meeting in person. There's social distancing and quarantine and self-isolation. So I think the hardest thing has been getting that sense of place when I can't actually see people. And a lot of people don't like to meet via Zoom, I found. It's easier for people to do phone calls than have to worry about sending links. And so I try to kind of combat that by asking sources for pictures of their studio, if they're an artist, for instance, and then kind of commenting on things. In doing that, I'm able to kind of get context and get details that I can kind of imbue into the story. So it's not just this disembodied voice, it's a person with a life and a story to tell.
Last year, we had, as we do every year, a contest for the Dow Jones Fellowship to place students in internships in news media outlets across the country. Ollie took me up on it and not only won the fellowship, but won a placement at the New York Times. And that internship is one that they will be doing this coming summer because of the pandemic in New York, working as a reporter at the New York Times. It doesn't get much better than that.
The one mantra I've kind of had throughout this entire fiasco of COVID is that we're in history. We are living in a moment that will be historic. And I think that's kind of given me solace throughout some of it, thinking that I'm part of something larger than myself and telling the stories that people will read in history books in 50 years, in 100 years. That's also part of our duty now, is to make sure these stories are told fairly in the future, and especially in terms of the political sphere, what went down there. We want to be able to say, here's what we did, kind of pass down this generational knowledge. We can't forget where we've come from and what we've come through, so I think that's important too.